Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail. On November 15, 2017, a 24-year-old cashier named Sydney Loof sent a Snapchat selfie to her friends with a simple caption about being ready for her date. By 8:32 that evening, her phone signal vanished completely. 19 days later, her remains were found in 14 separate pieces, scattered in garbage bags along the back roads of Clay County, Nebraska. Sydney was a Menards employee from Lincoln who loved her friends, stayed close with her family, and had recently matched with a woman calling herself Audrey on Tinder. That match would be the last decision she ever made. The person behind the profile was Bailey Boswell, a former high school athlete from Leon, Iowa, whose life had come apart through an abusive marriage to a man named Freddie Pennell, drug paraphernalia citations, and the loss of custody of her young daughter. By 2017, she was living with Aubrey Trail, a career con man 27 years her senior, who she had met through a sugar daddy arrangement on the Backpage classified site. Trail had been in and out of trouble since childhood. He had endured abuse as a boy, cycled through juvenile detention, and served time in a Tennessee prison at 17 for armed robbery at a motel. In the decades since, he had made a living trafficking stolen antiques and running confidence schemes across the Midwest. Together, Boswell and Trail had settled into a cramped basement apartment in Wilbur, Nebraska, where they lived off scams and manipulation. On the day Sydney disappeared, Home Depot and Menards surveillance cameras had already captured Boswell and Trail purchasing a hacksaw, tin snips, a utility knife, drop cloths, bleach, and 30-gallon trash bags, all hours before the date was set to begin. Trail later admitted to taking Sydney's life with an extension cord in the couple's basement apartment in Wilbur. They dismembered her body into 14 pieces and drove the remains out to rural roads near Edgar, where they were discovered on December 4th and 5th, 2017. The break came from Sydney's best friend, Brooklyn McChrystal, who refused to accept that Sydney had simply vanished. McChrystal swiped through Tinder until she matched with the same profile Sydney had gone out with, pulled a phone number from the conversation, and handed it straight to investigators. Meanwhile, the landlord of the Wilbur apartment reported the overwhelming smell of bleach coming from the unit. Boswell and Trail fled to Branson, Missouri, where they posted a rambling Facebook video from a hotel room, proclaiming their innocence and insisting they had nothing to hide. They were taken into custody on November 30th on unrelated fraud charges. Charges for the taking of Sydney's life followed on June 11, 2018. But how far would Trail go to protect Boswell from the consequences of what they had done together? During his June 2019 trial in Saline County, Trail smuggled a blade into the courtroom and slashed his own throat in front of the jury while shouting that Bailey was innocent. Blood pooled on the defense table. Proceedings were halted. He survived, and the trial resumed. A 3-judge panel convicted him of first-degree taking of life, conspiracy, and improper disposal of remains, and on June 9, 2021, he was sentenced to death. Boswell's trial, moved to Dawson County on a venue change, ended with a conviction in October 2020. Her defense argued that Trail had coerced and manipulated her, but prosecutors maintained she had been a willing participant from the moment she created the Tinder profile. A split 2-to-1 panel spared her from becoming the first woman on Nebraska's death row, and she received an automatic life sentence because the state requires unanimity for a capital sentence. The Nebraska Supreme Court rejected Trail's appeal in 2021 and upheld Boswell's conviction in May 2024. As of 2026, Trail remains on death row at Tecumseh State Correctional Institution, where he has petitioned the state to set his own execution date. Boswell is serving life at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women in York. What happened to Sydney Loof was the result of a Tinder swipe, a basement apartment, and 2 people who treated another human being as disposable. But in the case that follows, a mother of 5 vanished from her own driveway, and the man responsible was someone who had once promised to love her. Michelle Troconis and Fotis Doulos. Jennifer Farber Doulos was a mother of 5, a Brown University and NYU Tisch graduate, a writer, and the niece by marriage of fashion icon Liz Claiborne. On May 24, 2019, she dropped her children off at New Canaan Country School, drove home, and was never seen alive again. Her estranged husband, Fotis Doulos, had been waiting for her inside the garage. Jennifer had known this was coming. In her divorce filings, she had written that she understood filing for divorce would enrage Fotis, and that she believed he would retaliate by trying to harm her in some way. Fotis was born on August 6, 1967, in Turkey and raised in Athens. He was a Brown and Columbia MBA graduate who had built a luxury home construction company called 4 Group in Connecticut. Her father, Hilliard Farber, was a prominent Wall Street figure, and Jennifer herself had built a quiet, creative life centered on her children. Fotis came from a prominent Greek family, carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed rules applied to other people, and had been carrying on an affair with Michelle Troconis, a dual American-Venezuelan citizen and former television producer who had once hosted snow sports coverage for ESPN South America since 2017. Their relationship deepened as his marriage collapsed, and Troconis would eventually become entangled in the cover-up that followed. Investigators determined that Fotis attacked Jennifer in her garage that morning. Bloodstains matching her DNA mixed with his own were recovered from the garage floor and kitchen. Her Chevrolet Suburban was found abandoned near Waveney Park. But the most damning footage came from Hartford, where surveillance cameras captured Fotis and Troconis driving through the city, stopping at intervals to toss garbage bags into public trash receptacles. When those bags were recovered, they contained clothing stained with Jennifer's blood, along with zip ties. Jennifer's body has never been found. How does someone help conceal a disappearance and then claim they had no idea what was really happening? Fotis and Troconis were arrested in June 2019 for evidence tampering. Fotis's friend and attorney Kent Mauhini was also charged with conspiracy. In January 2020, Fotis was charged with capital taking of life and kidnapping. But on January 28th, while out on bond, he was found unresponsive in his Farmington garage from carbon monoxide exposure. He passed away 2 days later on January 30th, leaving behind a note in which he denied any involvement. His death meant he would never face trial, and for the Farber family, it meant the one person who knew where Jennifer's body was had taken that knowledge with him. Troconis' trial began in January 2024. On March 1st, she was convicted of conspiracy to commit the taking of a life, 2 counts of evidence tampering, 2 counts of conspiracy to tamper with evidence, and hindering prosecution. On May 31st, 2024, Judge Kevin Randolph sentenced her to 20 years suspended after 14.5 years served, plus 5 years of probation. During sentencing, she expressed deep sadness over the tragedy and deep regret over ever entering a relationship with Fotis Doulos. As of 2026, Troconis remains detained and is appealing her conviction. Kent Mauhini, the friend charged with conspiracy, still awaits trial. Jennifer was declared legally deceased in October 2023, but her body has never been recovered, and without it, her family has been denied the closure of knowing what happened to her in the final moments of her life. Her 5 children live with their grandmother, Gloria Farber. Connecticut has since passed a law known as Jennifer's Law, expanding protections for victims of domestic violence. Fotis Doulos took the truth about Jennifer's remains with him. But in the next case, the lies were far more elaborate, wrapped in religious prophecy and doomsday visions that concealed the fate of two missing children for months. Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell. In September of 2019, two children disappeared from Rexburg, Idaho. One was a 16-year-old girl named Tylee Ryan. The other was her younger brother, J.J. Vallow, who was 7 years old and autistic. Their mother, Lori Vallow, told people they were safe. She told relatives they were with friends. She told investigators nothing at all. 9 months later, both children were found buried in the backyard of a man named Chad Daybell, the woman's new husband, a man who had written books about the end of the world and who believed he could rate people on a scale of light and darkness. Lori had been a cosmetologist from Phoenix, married 4 times, who fell into an apocalyptic offshoot of LDS theology around 2018. Chad was a Rexburg-based author of religious end-times fiction who claimed to have had visions of the apocalypse and operated a personal spiritual rating system where he assigned numbers from 1 to 7 to determine whether someone carried light or darkness. People he labeled dark in his worldview were already lost. They met at a conference in October 2018, began an affair almost immediately, and within a year, the people standing between them and their new life together began to vanish one by one. On July 11, 2019, Lori's 4th husband, Charles Vallow, was shot and taken from this world by her brother, Alex Cox, who claimed self-defense. In early October, Brandon Boudreau, the ex-husband of Lori's niece, survived a gunshot aimed at him outside his Gilbert, Arizona home. On October 19th, Chad's first wife, Tammy Daybell, passed away at the age of 49. Her death was initially ruled natural, but was later determined to be asphyxiation. 2 weeks after Tammy's passing, Chad married Lori in Hawaii. Alex Cox then died of apparent natural causes in December 2019. Meanwhile, Tylee and JJ had not been seen since September. Lori told extended family the children were fine. She told investigators nothing. Months went by. When police finally executed a search warrant on Chad's Salem, Idaho, property on June 9, 2020, they recovered both children's remains from the yard. Tylee had been burned. JJ had been wrapped in plastic and bound with duct tape. Both had been buried just steps from where Chad and Lori had been living as newlyweds. How does a mother stand before cameras, smile, and say nothing while her own children lie buried in the earth behind her new husband's home? Both were indicted on charges related to taking lives in May 2021. Lori's Idaho trial concluded in May 2023, with convictions on all counts. On July 31st, she was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was filled with family members of the victims, many of whom had waited years for this moment. Chad's trial followed in the spring of 2024, and on May 30th, he was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree taking of life, conspiracy, grand theft, and insurance fraud. The very next day, June 1st, 2024, he was sentenced to death, the first capital sentence in eastern Idaho in decades. The judge noted the calculated nature of the offenses and the complete absence of remorse. Lori then represented herself in 2 Arizona trials. In April 2025, she was convicted of conspiracy in the taking of Charles Vallow's life. In June 2025, she was convicted again in the attempt on Brandon Boudreau. On July 25, 2025, Judge Justin Bereski imposed 2 consecutive life sentences, telling her that she had not victimized a single person, but many. that she had shattered lives and undermined trust. Those sentences run consecutively to her Idaho terms. As of 2026, Chad Daybell sits on Idaho's death row at Idaho Maximum Security Institution with an appeal filed. Lori Vallow Daybell is back in Idaho, serving life without parole. Her appeal centers on her disqualified attorney, Mark Means, whom the state revealed had been arranged and paid for by Chad himself. The Daybell case was driven by ideology, a twisted belief system that justified erasing anyone labeled dark. But in the case that follows, the motive was far simpler. It was about money, life insurance, and a wife who decided her husband was worth more to her gone than alive. Kouri Richins. On the night of March 4th, 2022, Kouri Richins called 911 and reported that her husband Eric was cold to the touch. When paramedics arrived, Eric Richins was beyond saving. He was 39 years old, a father of 3 boys, and the owner of a masonry business he had built from the ground up. The autopsy would later reveal that he had fentanyl in his system at 5 times the concentration required to end a life, ingested orally. 1 year later, Kouri published a children's grief book titled, Are You With Me? Eric had grown up in Bountiful, Utah, met Kouri at a Home Depot around 2009, and married her on June 15, 2013. They signed a prenuptial agreement and had 3 sons together, Carter, Ashton, and Weston. Eric ran C&E Masonry, a business he had built himself. Kouri founded K. Richins Realty in 2019, which looked successful from the outside, but was quietly hemorrhaging money. From the curb, it looked like a family building something together. Behind the scenes, forensic accountants would later testify that on the day after Eric's passing, Kouri's net worth was negative $1.6 million. She was drowning financially, and the man she had married was the only thing standing between her and the insurance payouts that could make it all go away. Eric had suspected something. In late 2020, he created the Eric Richins Living Trust, named his sister Katie as trustee, and deliberately excluded Kouri. He had also confided in a friend that if anything ever happened to him, Kouri was responsible. Prosecutors later established that Kouri had taken out approximately $2.2 million in life insurance on Eric, including one policy with falsified information. On Valentine's Day 2022, roughly 3 weeks before his passing, Eric became severely ill after Kouri allegedly served him a sandwich laced with fentanyl. He survived that attempt. On March 4th, prosecutors alleged she tried again, this time with a Moscow Mule cocktail meant to celebrate a real estate closing. Was this grief, or had the grieving widow been rehearsing this moment for weeks? Investigators traced the fentanyl supply through Kouri's former housekeeper, Carmen Lauber, who identified a man named Robert Crozier as the source. The chain of custody was meticulous. Prosecutors showed how Kouri had obtained the substance, how it had been administered, and how the dosage was far beyond anything accidental. A letter Kouri wrote from jail, referred to as the Walk the Dog letter, outlined a detailed plan for her family to provide false testimony on her behalf. The letter was intercepted, and its contents were used against her at trial. And then there was the book. 1 year after Eric's passing, Kouri had published Are You With Me?, a children's picture book about grief. She appeared on local television to promote it, speaking calmly about loss and healing while investigators were already building a case against her. Kouri was arrested on May 8, 2023, and charged with aggravated taking of life. After years of delays, trial began in Summit County on February 23, 2026. On March 16th, the jury convicted her on all counts after roughly 3 hours of deliberation. The charges included aggravated taking of a life, attempted aggravated taking of a life for the Valentine's Day incident, forgery, and 2 counts of insurance fraud. The lead prosecutor argued that she wanted Eric not only gone, but gone for good, and that she wanted to leave the marriage without leaving behind his money. As of 2026, Corey Richens faces 25 years to life without parole. Her sentencing is scheduled for May 13th. Eric's family received custody of the 3 boys in November 2024. Corey Richens acted alone, which sets her apart from every other case in this account. But the couple that follows makes up for it. Their partnership in harm was so deliberate, so documented, and so deeply contested in court that it reshaped Canadian law and left a country debating whether justice had actually been served. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. In the late 1980s, a series of attacks terrorized the Scarborough district of Toronto. The attacker, who would come to be known as the Scarborough Rapist, was responsible for at least 14 confirmed assaults and over 20 attempts. For years, police could not identify him. His name was Paul Bernardo, and by the time he was caught, the scope of what he had done had expanded far beyond what anyone in the community imagined. Bernardo was born on August 27, 1964, in Scarborough, Ontario. He studied accounting at the University of Toronto and projected the image of a clean-cut, well-spoken young professional. Neighbors liked him. Women trusted him. Nobody who passed him on the street would have guessed he was the person terrorizing their community after dark. Karla Homolka, born May 4, 1970, in Port Credit, Ontario, worked at a veterinary clinic and met Bernardo in October 1987. To those around them, they looked like an ordinary young couple. Their relationship escalated rapidly, and what followed would horrify a nation. On December 23, 1990, Karla's own younger sister, who was still a teenager, passed away after Karla drugged her with halothane stolen from her workplace while Bernardo committed acts of abuse. The death was initially ruled accidental. In the summer of 1991, a young girl was abducted in Burlington, held captive, harmed, and taken from this world. Her dismembered remains, encased in concrete blocks, were recovered from Lake Gibson on June 29, 1991. The same day, Bernardo and Homolka were married. The following April, another young girl was abducted from a church parking lot in St. Catharines after Homolka lured her over with a map. She was held for days before her life was taken. Her body was found on April 30, 1992. An additional victim, who survived, was drugged and subjected to abuse. Bernardo had actually been interviewed by police back in November 1990 and had provided DNA samples, but those samples sat untested for over 2 years because of a processing backlog. In January 1993, after Bernardo attacked Homolka with a flashlight, she fled and provided a statement to investigators. His DNA was finally matched on February 1, 1993, and he was arrested on February 17th. How is it possible that samples from a known suspect sat in a lab for 2 years while more lives were being destroyed? Before the videotapes were found, Homolka negotiated a plea deal. She accepted 12 years for 2 counts of manslaughter in exchange for full testimony against Bernardo. The Crown prosecution believed she was a coerced participant, a battered wife acting under duress. But when investigators recovered videotapes that Bernardo had hidden in the bathroom ceiling of their home, tapes his own defense attorney Ken Murray had withheld for months before turning them over to the court. The footage revealed Homolka as an active and willing participant in the abuse and captivity of the victims. She was not a frightened bystander. She was on camera. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. The agreement became known as the Deal with the Devil, and Canada has been arguing about it ever since. A 1996 government inquiry led by Justice Patrick Galligan concluded the deal was legally defensible, given what prosecutors knew at the time. But that finding has done little to quiet the anger of the victims' families or the public. Bernardo's 1995 trial in Toronto ended with convictions on 2 counts of first-degree taking of life, 2 kidnappings, 2 aggravated assaults, and indignity to a body. On September 1, 1995, he was sentenced to life with no eligibility for parole for 25 years and was designated a dangerous offender on November 3rd. The lead prosecutor stated plainly that Homolka had implicated herself in first-degree offenses and was in no way a victim. Karla Homolka served her full 12-year sentence and was released on July 4, 2005. She reportedly lives in Quebec under a new identity, having taken the name Liane Bordelais, and is married to the brother of her former prison lawyer. She has 3 children and has never publicly expressed remorse. Bernardo has been denied parole 3 times and was controversially transferred from maximum security Millhaven to medium security La Macasa Institution in Quebec on May 29, 2023. A move that generated national outrage. A Correctional Service Canada review upheld the transfer in July of that year. As of 2026, he remains classified as a dangerous offender and is considered effectively certain to spend the rest of his life behind bars. The families of the victims continue to live with what was taken from them, and the debate over whether Homolka's deal represented justice or a failure of it shows no sign of fading. The Bernardo and Homolka case forced Canada to confront how a system designed to pursue justice can sometimes produce the opposite. But the case that follows predates the digital age entirely. In the late 1940s, 2 people found each other through a Lonely Hearts column and turned that connection into something far darker than anyone answering a personal ad could have imagined. If you're liking this video and you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. We drop new cases every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Martha Beck and Raymond Fernandez. In 1947, a man with a steel plate in his skull answered a personal ad placed by a lonely nurse in Florida. Within weeks, she had abandoned her 2 children to the Salvation Army and moved in with him. Within 2 years, they had confessed to as many as 17 takings of life across multiple states, and the tabloids had given them a name that would follow them all the way to the electric chair. Raymond Fernandez was born on December 17, 1914, in the Hawaii Territory to Spanish immigrant parents. In December 1945, while working aboard a ship, a steel hatch fell on his head and fractured his skull. His family said his entire personality changed after the injury. He became manipulative, erratic, and obsessed with control. After serving time in a Tallahassee prison in 1946 on theft charges, he reportedly learned what he called love magic from other inmates and joined a Lonely Hearts correspondence club called Mother Diane's Friendly Club in New York. He began writing to widows, courting them, stealing their money, and vanishing. Martha Beck was born Martha Seabrook on May 6, 1920 in Milton, Florida. She had endured a childhood marked by cruelty and isolation, worked as a nurse, and was a divorced mother of 2 when she placed a personal ad that Fernandez answered. From their first meeting, she became completely consumed by him. She abandoned her children and joined his operation, posing as his sister while he romanced widows through the mail. Together, they traveled the country, targeting women who had answered Fernandez's letters looking for companionship. Beck posed as his sister, helping to build trust. Fernandez would charm the women, propose marriage or financial partnership, drain their savings, and then move on to the next. When victims grew suspicious or threatened to expose the scheme, the couple turned to violence. In late 1948, a 66-year-old woman named Janet Fay was bludgeoned with a hammer by Beck and strangled by Fernandez at his Long Island apartment. They hid her body in a trunk and buried it in a rented house in Queens. In February 1949, in Wyoming Township, Michigan, a 28-year-old widow named Delphine Downing was shot by Fernandez after Beck became jealous of the attention he was giving her. Her 2-year-old daughter, Raynell, was drowned by Beck in a basin. The couple buried both bodies in the cellar and poured cement over the floor. How does someone sit across from a grieving widow, smile, offer comfort, and then take everything from her, including her life? Neighbors reported the Downings missing. Police arrived on February 28, 1949, and found both bodies under the basement floor. Beck and Fernandez were arrested immediately. During interrogation, they produced a 73-page statement in which they confessed to as many as 17 takings of life, though only 3 to 4 were ever firmly documented. Michigan had no capital punishment at the time, so authorities extradited them to New York to stand trial for the Fay case, where the death penalty was still in effect. Their trial in the Bronx during the summer of 1949 was a sensation. The courtroom was packed every day. Testimony detailed the Lonely Hearts scheme, the violence, and the bizarre dynamic between a con man and the woman who had given up everything to stay by his side. Both were convicted and sentenced to death. On March 8, 1951, Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck were executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. Fernandez went first. His final words were a declaration of love for Beck. Beck followed shortly after. Her last meal was fried chicken. His was an onion omelet and a Cuban cigar. They were the last couple executed together in the state of New York, and their case has since inspired 3 feature films, each one trying to make sense of a partnership that left a trail of widows, orphans, and shallow graves. The Lonely Hearts case was a product of its era, before digital footprints and cell tower data. But the case that follows unfolded behind a different kind of ordinary facade. For over 2 decades, a house in Gloucester, England, concealed horrors that would not come to light until a casual family joke led police to start digging. Fred and Rosemary West. For years, the neighbors on Cromwell Street in Gloucester knew Fred West as the scruffy builder next door who was always working on his house. He was chatty, odd, and seemingly harmless. His wife Rosemary was quieter, kept to herself, and rarely made eye contact. What nobody on the street knew was that beneath the patio, the cellar floor, and the garden of number 25, the remains of at least 9 young women had been buried. 3 more were hidden at other properties. Fred West was born on September 29, 1941, in Much Marcle, Herefordshire. He was an itinerant laborer, an ice cream van driver, and a petty thief with a long history of violence and harm toward minors in his own household. Rosemary Letts was born on November 29, 1953, in Northam, Devon. She came from a troubled home where her father, who suffered from schizophrenia, subjected her to abuse as a child. She met Fred in 1969 when she was 15. They married on January 29, 1972, and moved into 25 Cromwell Street shortly after. Between 1967 and 1987, 12 confirmed victims lost their lives at the hands of the Wests. Their stepdaughter was harmed fatally by Rosemary in 1971, while Fred was in prison. Fred's first wife was also taken from this world. The remaining victims were young women, most of them teenagers or in their early 20s. They were targeted, abused, and their remains were dismembered and buried on the property or at nearby locations. One of the victims was their own daughter, who disappeared in 1987 at the age of 16. The family had a private joke about it, Her siblings would say she was buried under the patio. Nobody took it seriously until a police officer overheard it. On February 24, 1994, police obtained a search warrant for the Cromwell Street property. A reporter confronted Fred outside the house and asked him about his daughter. His response was chilling. He told the reporter flatly that he had not harmed his daughter. Excavation began on February 26th and continued through June 7th of that year. Crews recovered 9 sets of remains from the cellar and garden. 3 additional sets were found at other locations connected to the Wests. What kind of life continues year after year inside a house built on top of the remains of the people who once trusted you? Fred was charged with 12 counts of taking a life on December 13, 1994, and held at HMP Birmingham. On January 1, 1995, he hanged himself in his cell using strips of bedding at approximately 12:55 in the afternoon. He was 53 years old. He had reportedly grown despondent after Rosemary publicly cut him off and refused all contact. He left no confession and no explanation. He never stood trial. Rosemary's trial opened at Winchester Crown Court in October 1995. Without Fred to testify, the prosecution built its case on forensic evidence, survivor testimony, and the pattern of disappearances that mapped directly onto Rosemary's presence at the Cromwell Street house. Over the course of weeks, prosecutors laid out the evidence connecting her directly to 10 of the 12 known takings of life. On November 22, 1995, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 10 counts. Justice Mantell sentenced her to 10 concurrent life terms. In 1997, Home Secretary Jack Straw imposed a whole-life tariff, making her only the second woman in modern British history, after Myra Hindley, to receive one. There would be no parole hearing, no review, no release date. As of 2026, Rosemary West is 72 years old and imprisoned at HMP New Hall in Flockton, West Yorkshire. She lives under a deed poll alias in a unit called Poplar House 1, reportedly in poor health, isolated, and never to be released. 25 Cromwell Street was demolished in October 1996. The name Myra Hindley came up during the sentencing of Rosemary West for a reason. Before the Wests, it was Hindley and her partner who had committed what many in Britain still consider the most harrowing crimes in the country's modern history. And unlike Cromwell Street, the burial ground they chose was not a cellar, it was a moor. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Between 1963 and 1965, 5 children vanished from the streets and fairgrounds of Greater Manchester. Their ages ranged from 10 to 17. 2 of their bodies were found buried on the vast, wind-swept expanse of Saddleworth Moor. One has never been recovered. The couple responsible for their disappearance became the most despised figures in British criminal history, and the case itself, known simply as the Moors murders, remains a wound that has never fully closed. Ian Brady was born Ian Duncan Stewart on January 2, 1938, in the Gorbals district of Glasgow. He was given to foster carers as an infant and accumulated juvenile convictions for housebreaking before moving to Manchester, where he became consumed by the writings of Nietzsche, the Marquis de Sade, and other extremist philosophy. Myra Hindley was born on July 23, 1942, in Crumpsall, Manchester. She worked as a typist at a chemical supply company called Millwards Merchandising in Gorton, where she met Brady in January 1961. She became completely devoted to him, adopting his ideology and his obsessions, and within 2 years, their shared fixation turned to action. The first victim disappeared on July 12, 1963. 4 more followed over the next 2 years. Each was abducted, subjected to abuse, and taken from this world. The victims were buried on Saddleworth Moor or concealed at properties connected to the couple. In one case, a recording was made of the victim in distress, a 16-minute audio tape that would later be played in open court and leave jurors and spectators visibly shaken. The final victim, a 17-year-old, was attacked with an axe inside the couple's home on October 6, 1965, in the presence of Hindley's brother-in-law, David Smith. Smith reported what he had witnessed to police the very next morning. What happens inside a courtroom when a jury is forced to listen to the voice of a child begging to go home? Brady was arrested on October 7, 1965. Hindley was taken into custody 4 days later. Documents found in Hindley's car detailed the planning of the final attack. Photographs taken by Brady of Hindley posing on the moor led investigators to 2 of the buried remains in 1965. 2 more confessions came in 1987, leading to the recovery of a 3rd victim's remains on July 1st of that year. The 5th victim has never been found. Their trial opened at Chester Assizes on April 19, 1966. The audio recording was played for the jury. Brady was convicted on May 6th of 3 counts of taking a life. Hindley was convicted of 2 counts and 1 count of harboring Brady. The death penalty had been abolished in Britain just 6 weeks before sentencing. Both received life imprisonment with a recommended minimum of 30 years. Justice Fenton Atkinson described them as 2 sadistic offenders of the utmost depravity. Hindley spent the next 3 decades campaigning for release. She wrote letters, enlisted supporters, and argued that she had been under Brady's psychological control. In 1985, she confessed to involvement in all 5 cases, including the 2 she had not been convicted of. Home Secretary David Waddington and his successors imposed a whole-life tariff, ensuring she would never walk free. No amount of lobbying, legal maneuvering, or public appeals changed the outcome. She died on November 15, 2002, at West Suffolk Hospital from bronchial pneumonia. She was 60 years old and had served 36 years. Her body was cremated in secret to prevent disruption, and no public service was held. Brady was transferred to Ashworth Hospital in 1985 after a diagnosis of severe personality disorder. He never expressed remorse and showed no interest in cooperating with investigators seeking the 5th victim's remains. He went on a hunger strike beginning in 1999 and was force-fed for years. In March 2000, he petitioned the High Court for the right to end his own life. The court refused. He died at Ashworth on May 15, 2017, at the age of 79, after 51 years in custody. He never disclosed where the 5th victim's body was buried, a fact that continues to torment that child's family to this day. The Moors case is defined by the silence Brady took to his grave. But in the farmlands of rural Missouri, it was not silence that gave the next case away. It was a handwritten list found in a kitchen drawer, with names on one side and small marks beside the ones who would never be heard from again. Ray and Faye Copeland. In 1989, a former farmhand called a Crime Stoppers tip line in Missouri and told the operator that his old boss had tried to take his life. The caller's name was Jack McCormick, and he said that a cattle farmer named Ray Copeland had been hiring drifters, using their identities to write bad checks at livestock auctions, and then making sure those drifters were never seen again. What police found when they searched the Copeland property would make Ray and Faye Copeland the oldest couple ever sentenced to death in the United States. Ray Copeland was born on December 30, 1914, in Oklahoma. He was illiterate, had spent most of his adult life cycling through county jails on forgery and cattle theft charges, and by the mid-1960s had settled on a 40-acre farm in Mooresville, Missouri, with his wife Faye. Faye Della Wilson, born August 4, 1921, had married Ray around 1940. They raised 5 children. On the surface, they were an aging farm couple living quietly in the country. Beneath that surface, Ray had devised a scheme that used human beings as disposable tools. Because Ray was a known bad check writer, he could no longer do business at livestock auctions under his own name. So he began recruiting transient workers from day labor halls in Springfield. He would bring them to the farm, use their identities to purchase cattle with fraudulent checks, sell the cattle for cash, and then eliminate the only witnesses who could tie him to the fraud. Each man was shot with a .22 caliber Marlin rifle and buried on rented land or in nearby barns. 5 confirmed victims lost their lives between 1986 and 1989. Paul Cowart, 20, from Arkansas. John Freeman, 27, from Indiana. Jimmy Dale Harvey, 27, from Missouri. Wayne Warner, Dennis Murphy. All of them were transient laborers who had come to the farm looking for honest work and found something else entirely. If a man cannot read or write, who keeps the records? That question led investigators to the single most damning piece of evidence in the case. In the Copeland kitchen, police found a handwritten list of 12 names, written by Fay. Beside 5 of those names were small X marks. Those 5 names matched the 5 men whose remains had been recovered from barns on neighboring properties. Fay had kept the books because Ray could not read or write. And in doing so, she had created a ledger of the missing. Police searched the Copeland farm in October 1989 and began recovering remains. Fay was tried first in November 1990 at the age of 69. Her defense argued battered woman syndrome, claiming she had lived in fear of Ray for decades. The jury convicted her on all 5 counts and sentenced her to 4 death sentences and 1 life term. She became the oldest woman ever placed on death row in the United States. Ray was tried in March 1991 and convicted on all 5 counts. He, too, was sentenced to death. Together, at ages 76 and 69, they became the oldest couple in American history to receive the death penalty. When Ray was told of Fay's sentence, his only response was that those things happen to some people. Ray Copeland died of natural causes at Potosi Correctional Center on October 19, 1993, while awaiting execution. On August 6, 1999, a federal judge overturned Fay's death sentence, finding that the jury had been wrongly denied evidence of Ray's long history of domestic abuse. She was resentenced to consecutive life terms. After a stroke in August 2002 left her partially paralyzed, Governor Bob Holden granted her medical parole. She was transferred to Morningside Center Nursing Home in Chillicothe, Missouri, where she died of natural causes on December 23, 2003, at the age of 82. The Copeland case was built on a list, ink on paper, names, and marks, kept in a kitchen drawer by a woman who may have been complicit or may have been too afraid to refuse. That question was never fully resolved. But in the final case, there is no such ambiguity about the partnership. In 1980, on the nightclub strips of Los Angeles, a nurse and a factory worker formed a bond over violence itself, and the evidence they left behind made the nature of their arrangement impossible to deny. Carol Bundy and Doug Clark. In the summer of 1980, someone was preying on young women along the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles. The victims were found along roadsides and ravines near Hollywood, and in one case a severed head was discovered in an alley, cosmetics freshly applied to the face. The press called the unknown perpetrator the Sunset Strip offender. Investigators would eventually trace the crimes to a factory worker named Doug Clark and a vocational nurse named Carol Bundy, 2 people who had met at a country bar on Christmas night and turned their relationship into a nightmare that left Los Angeles reeling. Douglas Daniel Clark was born on March 10, 1948, in Pennsylvania. His father was a United States Navy intelligence officer, and Clark spent his childhood moving through 37 countries as a military dependent. By 1980, he was working as a boiler operator at a soap factory in Burbank and spending his nights in the bars and clubs along the Strip. Carol Bundy, born Carol Mary Peters on August 26, 1942, in Indiana, had endured abuse during childhood, been placed in multiple foster homes, and had cycled through 3 failed marriages before meeting Clark at a North Hollywood bar called Little Nashville. She moved him into her apartment on Lamona Street in Van Nuys almost immediately. Between June and August of 1980, at least 6 young women were taken from this world in the Los Angeles area. 2 stepsisters, both teenagers, were abducted from Huntington Beach in June and found near Griffith Park. 2 more victims, both young women in their 20s, were found later that month. One of them was decapitated, and Clark brought the remains back to the apartment, where Bundy applied makeup to them. A 5th victim, a 17-year-old runaway, was found in a ravine. Additional unidentified victims were connected to the pair through forensic evidence. Then, on August 5, 1980, Bundy took a life on her own. Her on-and-off lover, a man named Jack Murray, who had learned about the crimes, was stabbed and decapitated by Bundy in his van to keep him from going to the authorities. What does it mean when the person who is supposed to save lives tells her co-workers she can no longer live with the ones she has helped take? 4 days later, on August 9th, Bundy confessed to fellow nurses at work. She told them she could not take it anymore, that she was supposed to save lives, not end them. Both Bundy and Clark were arrested on August 11th. Forensic investigators matched a bloody boot print found in Clark's garage to the crime scenes, and the weapons used in the attacks were recovered from his possessions. Clark's trial began in October 1982 before Judge Ricardo Torres. He cycled through multiple attorneys and represented himself at points during the proceedings. His defense strategy was to blame Bundy and her lover Jack Murray for all of the crimes. Bundy, granted use immunity, testified as the chief prosecution witness. On January 28, 1983, the jury convicted Clark of 6 counts of first-degree taking of life, 1 count of attempted taking of life, and mutilation of human remains. He was sentenced to death on February 15, 1983. Bundy pleaded guilty on May 2, 1983, to the taking of Jack Murray's life and 1 additional count, and received 2 consecutive sentences totaling 52 years to life. Carol Bundy died of heart failure in a California prison on December 9, 2003. She was 61. Doug Clark spent 40 years on death row at San Quentin, maintaining his innocence through every appeal and every denied petition. California had not carried out an execution in years, and the state's de facto moratorium meant Clark would likely never face the sentence imposed on him. On October 11, 2023, Doug Clark died of natural causes in custody at the age of 75. He had been behind bars for 43 years. 10 couples, 10 different motives. But in every case, the people closest to the victims were the ones who caused the most harm. Thanks for watching. Click here for the next video.